My name is Margaret Ellis, and I would give anything to unread what I saw. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started on a Sunday. The rain hadn't stopped for hours, tapping rhythmically on the kitchen window as if reminding me that everything eventually leaks, even secrets. I had just changed the bed sheets in Claire's room. My daughter, my only child, had come home from college for a few days. She was always messy books, half-open sweaters draped on chairs, water bottles under the bed. But it was the small floral-patterned journal sticking out beneath her pillow that caught my attention. I didn't go looking for it. I wasn't snooping. Not at first. But the edge of it peeked out like it wanted to be found, like it was daring me. And I hesitated. My fingers hovered above it for a long time. I told myself I would just move it to her nightstand. That's all. But the weight of it in my hand, it felt like more than paper. It felt alive. And before I could stop myself, I opened it. At first, it was innocent. Her handwriting, that perfect script I used to praise in second grade, filled the pages with harmless entries, class schedules, minor grievances about roommates, dreams about traveling. And then I turned the page. I can't stand the way she always talks like she knows better. She thinks she's this great self-sacrificing mother, but she doesn't realize how small she makes everyone feel. The words hit me like a slap. I froze, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and denial. I read it again. And again. She was writing about me. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My legs had gone numb. My mind raced through memories, trying to make sense of what I had just read. When had I ever made her feel small? She acts like giving up her life for me was noble, but I didn't ask for her sacrifices. I didn't ask to be her purpose. I swallowed hard. My heart felt like it had sunk through my ribs and into the floor. I remembered every school lunch packed, every dance recital attended, every night I stayed awake when she had the flu. I remembered the way I held her when her father left. She had always been my purpose. Sometimes I wonder what life would be like without her guilt hanging over me. Like, what would it be like if she just left? I snapped the diary shut. I couldn't breathe. That last line, what would it be like if she just left, echoed in my chest like an accusation. I wasn't supposed to see this. I knew that. But I had. And there was no going back. For a moment, I just sat there in that childhood room, still painted soft lavender, trying to reconcile the daughter I loved with the girl who had written those words. It was easier when she was little. Back then, she used to cry when I left for work. Now I wondered if she celebrated when I wasn't home. I put the diary back. Carefully. Exactly where it had been. Pillow fluffed nothing out of place. And then I went downstairs to start the roast like nothing had happened. Like my world hadn't tilted. Claire came in an hour later, phone in hand, music playing through one AirPod. She smiled at me, a real smile, the kind that used to warm me from the inside. She kissed my cheek. "Smells good," she said, peeking at the oven. I nodded. "Dinner will be ready in 20. She didn't notice the way I was watching her, the way I was reading her now like a second diary. Every word, every glance, every silence. She hummed a tune. She laughed at something on her phone. She sat at the counter and told me about a funny professor who wore socks with bananas on them. And all I could think was, you wonder what life would be like without me. That night after she went to bed, I stood in the hallway for a long time, hand hovering over her doorknob. I didn't go in. I didn't touch the diary again. But I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. Where had I gone wrong? I thought I had raised her with empathy, with openness. I had been present, hadn't I? I stayed through the hard years. I supported her every choice. Even when she chose to go to college 5 states away, I cheered her on with trembling lips. But her words? They didn't sound like frustration. They sounded like contempt, like something had been building inside her, something ugly and unspoken. And I had never seen it. Or maybe I chose not to. Maybe motherhood makes you blind to the cracks in your children. The next morning, I made pancakes, her favorite with blueberries and lemon zest. She ate them like everything was fine, like she hadn't written those things in ink. And I smiled like I hadn't read them. But something in me had shifted. A door had opened, and behind it, the house wasn't as warm as I thought. There were shadows there. Secrets. I just hadn't decided yet if I was brave enough to walk through. The next few days felt like acting in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Claire stayed for the week, mostly lounging around, calling friends occasionally, making small talk with me about mundane things, the humidity, a new cafe that opened near campus, a show on Netflix she thought I'd like. She didn't know I was hearing her with new ears, now watching her with a new lens. Every word she said I dissected. Every laugh, every glance at her phone, every pause in conversation, it all had a different weight. I was no longer her mother in that kitchen. I was the woman she had written about. And part of me, the most wounded human part, wanted to grab that diary, march down the stairs, and read it aloud to her over dinner. To make her explain each line, each word, each ugly little thought she'd etched onto paper like it didn't matter. But I didn't. I just cooked and listened and waited until Thursday evening. Claire had gone to take a bath. Her phone, always glued to her hand, was left carelessly on the coffee table. It lit up twice, first with a message from a contact named Dad, and then with another from a name I didn't recognize, Jenna. It wasn't the emoji that caught my attention. It was the preview. Honestly, it's only a matter of time. She'll break when she knows the whole thing. The whole thing. My stomach dropped. There was more. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have, but I picked up the phone. My hand was shaking. She hadn't locked it. A mistake. One of many. I opened the conversation with Jenna. The messages stretched back weeks. And what I read wasn't just immature venting, it was cruel. She still thinks I admire her. I swear she walks around like some sad Joan of Arc with a casserole dish. I'm telling you, once I file the paperwork, she won't even see it coming. He said we'll talk to the lawyer right after summer ends. She'll probably cry, but whatever. I'm over pretending. Paperwork. Lawyer. She. Me. I couldn't breathe. There it was, in plain text. Claire and my ex-husband, her father, were planning something. And judging by the tone, it wasn't a surprise party. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat down slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking the phone. I scrolled further. The messages spanned months. They spoke about my house, the one I'd poured everything into after the divorce, and what to do when it's in Claire's name. My name wasn't mentioned once with kindness, not once with love. I had gone from mom to she, a shadow, an obstacle. I put the phone back right where it was, just in time. Claire walked in, towel in her hair, humming to herself. Ugh, your water pressure is so much better than mine at school. I nodded, still seated. Glad you enjoyed it. She smiled and picked up her phone. Didn't notice anything out of place. Just walked upstairs, texting as she went. That night, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears, warm and endless. I didn't sleep. Again. Instead, I stayed up thinking about the moment she first called me mama, about how I used to braid her hair for school, about the time she broke her ankle in middle school and I slept on the hospital cot next to her for 3 days straight. And all of it, all of that love, was invisible to her now. I started wondering, had I loved her so much that I forgot to teach her how to love me back? The next morning, I made coffee and sat in the sunroom staring at the photo wall: birthdays, Christmases, graduation, the frozen smiles that now looked like lies. Claire came down with her suitcase. Her ride was coming in 10 minutes. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, sipping orange juice. I smiled too quickly. "Just tired. Didn't sleep much." She hugged me before leaving, a tight one chin on my shoulder. Familiar, comforting, and false. Because I knew, even as I felt her heartbeat against mine, that my daughter had written me off, not just emotionally, but legally. She was planning to take my house, the house I paid for, the house I cleaned, maintained, protected, the house where I held her when she was sick, where I cried after her father left us, where I celebrated her college acceptance letter. And now she wanted to erase me from it, like I was a bad memory, like I had already died. I closed the door behind her, slowly. Then I went straight to her old room and opened the diary again. This time, I wasn't afraid. I flipped to the middle, then near the back, looking for the rest of the truth. And I found it. There was an entry dated just 2 weeks ago. The lawyer said once I prove she's no longer working, it's easier to file under the caretaker conversion clause. He called it a gentle eviction. Cute. Dad said he'd sign whatever I need. Says she's had her time in that house. I'm just ready to live there without her ghost energy. Caretaker. Conversion. Gentle eviction. They were evicting me from my own life, not just with paper with laughter behind my back. With ugly little metaphors. With a strategy. And that's when I knew this wasn't confusion. This wasn't some misguided frustration from a young adult trying to find her identity. This was war. And she had already chosen her side. I didn't eat for a day after that. Not because I was punishing myself or mourning, though maybe in some quiet way I was, but because everything tasted bitter. Every bite reminded me that my daughter thought of me as disposable, like an old sponge left by the sink, useful until it wasn't. I kept rereading that word in the diary, ghost energy. I suppose that's what I had become to her, someone who haunted the halls of a house she already believed was hers. A shadow she was ready to sweep out with the dust bunnies and outdated curtains. I sat on the living room couch, the same one where she'd opened Christmas presents with shaking hands and squeals of joy. The same one where she sobbed when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I remember holding her, then rocking her like she was 5 again, telling her, "I'm here. Always." And now, I was the ghost. The more I thought about it, the more the little things started to click into place. Things I had ignored, dismissed, or refused to see. Like how she suddenly insisted I put the house in a trust just in case something happens. Or how her father, after years of silence, had begun calling her more frequently, even sending her money. Or how she started saying things like, "I'll repaint this place one day," while walking through the hallway, fingers gliding along the walls like an appraiser. I was the fool in the room, smiling, proud, unaware. Claire didn't just write about resenting me. She had been planning to replace me. That night, I called my sister Lillian. We hadn't spoken much in the past year, not for any reason other than life, just pulling us into different corners. Her voice was warm and familiar. "Lillian," I whispered, "if your daughter ever tried to take your home, what would you do?" She was silent for a moment. "Maggie, what happened?" I paused. I didn't want to say it out loud, because speaking it meant accepting it was real. She's been writing things, in her diary, and texting people, about getting me out of this house. Another pause. Then Claire. "You're Claire." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "The one who cried when you left her at daycare." "Yes," I said quietly. "That Claire." And then Lillian said the one thing I didn't want to admit. "You always protected her so much that she never learned consequences." The words hurt. Not because they were mean, but because they were true. I had shielded Claire from everything, from harsh teachers, from cruel friends, even from the full truth about her father. Maybe she learned that love is a service, one she was entitled to, not one she needed to give back. I sat with that for hours after our call ended. I thought about the time I gave up a promotion to be closer to her school, about the nights I graded papers on the couch while she fell asleep beside me, about the time I canceled a date because she had a nightmare and didn't want to sleep alone. She never knew about any of that, because I never told her, because I didn't think love was something you itemize, but maybe I was wrong. The next morning, I took out an old photo album, one of those leather-bound ones with the sticky pages and plastic sheets. I turned the pages slowly. Her baby pictures, our trip to Yellowstone, her high school graduation, all those moments sacred to me, disposable to her. And then, without really knowing why, I started to write. Not in a diary, not in a letter, but on my laptop, a file titled What She Forgot. It started like this. You were born at 3:17 a.m. I had been in labor for 16 hours. Your father fainted. I laughed even through the pain, because I knew from the moment they put you in my arms that you were worth it. I gave you my time, my breath, my future. I didn't keep a scorecard, I didn't ask for repayment. But I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd earned your loyalty. I wrote for hours, pouring everything onto the page, memories, sacrifices, tiny moments she never noticed. I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but it felt right, like putting the truth back on the record. Because if she wanted to rewrite our history, I wasn't going to let her do it alone. I needed to remember who I was, and remind her of what she was forgetting. That night, I reopened the diary one last time, not to hurt myself, but to face the full picture, to stop looking away. There was one last entry dated 3 days before she arrived home. If Mom pushes back, I'll play the guilt card. She always folds when I cry. That line, that line. It shook something loose in me. Not because it was cruel, I had already accepted that cruelty was part of her now, but because it confirmed the worst truth she knew exactly how I loved. And she was weaponizing it. I closed the book. Calm. Not numb calm. Because now I understood. She thought I was weak. She mistook my silence for surrender. She thought tears were my leash. But she had forgotten one thing. I may have raised her with love, but I didn't survive this life by being soft. I started looking back, but not through the lens of nostalgia, through clarity, cold and necessary. Memories are slippery things. For years I kept them polished and framed moments I believed defined our bond. Now I was pulling those same moments from their pedestals and holding them up to the light, looking for cracks. And I found them. So many cracks. I remembered Claire's 12th birthday. I had planned a surprise sleepover, handmade decorations, baked a cake from scratch. She barely said thank you. Instead, she cried because the gift she really wanted, a tablet, wasn't there. I thought it was just preteen hormones. I let it go. Another time she was 16. Her boyfriend cheated on her and she came home sobbing. I stayed up with her all night, feeding her soup, braiding her hair, letting her scream into my sweater. The next day, she posted online, "Thank God for my dad. He always knows how to calm me down." Her father had texted her 2 sentences. I saw the timestamp. He wasn't even in the state. But I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as she was okay. That was my pattern, wasn't it? Minimizing my pain, justifying hers. After the divorce, Claire stayed with me. I offered that stability. Her father disappeared into a condo across town with a younger woman. And when he did show up every other weekend, a few holidays, he was a hero. No rules, no discipline, just gifts and grand promises. She called him her fun parent. She called me Mom, just Mom. And I carried that label like a soldier carries orders, unquestioning. Until now. Now I realized I had been the scaffolding of her life, invisible until removed. The hardest moment to revisit was the lake house. We went there when she was 19, just the two of us. It was meant to be healing a last trip before she fully moved into her adult life. I had rented it near the edge of a quiet forest with a view of the water and a dock where we fished and read books. At least, I thought that's what we did. In the diary, I found her version. That lake trip was suffocating. She kept watching me, asking if I was okay every 5 minutes. I wanted to scream. I was already dealing with Dad's legal stuff, and she kept making everything about her. She doesn't even know she's the problem. That week had been one of my favorites. I had felt close to her. We cooked together. I thought she had smiled, genuinely smiled, as we roasted marshmallows over the fire pit. I didn't know she'd been texting her father about how to get me off the house deed. The legal stuff. That's what she meant. They had started the process back then. I was making pancakes while they were drawing lines on my property. I stood in front of the mirror that evening, just looking at myself. My face not young, not glamorous, just worn with the years of a life built around someone who now wanted me erased. I was no saint. I knew that. I had my flaws. I worried too much. I held on too tight. I spoke in the language of caution, not courage. But I never stopped loving her. And yet she saw me as a burden, an obstruction. The next morning, I took a walk. The neighborhood had barely changed in 20 years. Same red brick mailboxes, same golden retrievers barking through iron gates. But I felt like a stranger there now, like I was walking through someone else's dream. At the end of the block was the house where Mrs. Hartley used to live. Her daughter had sent her to a retirement home after a fall. Word was she cried for weeks. No one visited. And eventually, the daughter sold the house. Gutted it. Turned the flower garden into gravel. Mrs. Hartley died last winter. Alone. I used to tell myself that won't be me. Claire would never let that happen. Now I wasn't so sure. When I came back from my walk, I found myself standing in the hallway staring at Claire's childhood door. I opened it slowly, sat on her old bed, and tried to imagine how she saw me. What version of me she had constructed in her head. The martyr. The nag. The obstacle. I remembered once when she was 5. She came home with a crayon drawing. It was a picture of the two of us, me with a big heart on my shirt, and her holding my hand. She had written in shaky, colorful letters, "My mom is magic." When did the magic die? Did it bleed slowly from the years, the disagreements, the silences, or was it ripped out all at once, replaced by resentment? The diary hadn't answered that. It only told me how far gone we were, but I realized something important in that moment. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about identity. Because if Claire no longer saw me as her mother, if she had reduced me to a roadblock, then who was I without that title? I didn't know. But I needed to find out. And fast. Because the woman she thought she could manipulate, that woman was fading. And someone else was waking up in her place. Someone who wasn't going to be erased. The lake house. Even now, just thinking about it makes my chest tighten. I hadn't planned to revisit it, not physically, not emotionally. But the more I read in that diary, the more I realized that what I thought had been a peaceful healing trip was actually something far more dangerous, the beginning of my daughter's campaign to reclaim the life she believed I was borrowing from her. It was all in the margins of the diary, not always direct, sometimes cryptic. A drawing of the house with a little note beside it where the first seeds were planted. Another entry. The perfect place to have the talk. But I chickened out. She had planned to confront me there. I remember that week in painstaking detail now. The way she kept checking her phone. The way she flinched when I talked about handing down the house someday. The way she recoiled slightly when I hugged her goodnight on the last evening. Back then, I thought she was just going through post-college restlessness. I even blamed myself for smothering her with too many questions, too many check-ins. But now I could see it clearly. She had gone to that lake house not to connect, but to decide. And I had been too blind to notice. Back then I thought the big betrayal had yet to come, that it would land like a lightning bolt. But I understand now betrayal doesn't always crack like thunder. Sometimes it drips in slowly, word by word, decision by decision, until one day the floor you're standing on is soaked through and everything collapses. I still had the key to that lake house. The owner, a friend of mine from my old school district, had given me a copy in case I ever needed peace and quiet. I hadn't gone back since that trip, but now I needed to see it again. I packed a bag with no real plan, just a change of clothes, my laptop, and quietly Claire's diary. I didn't tell anyone, not even Lillian. I just drove. 2.5 hours. Through winding forest roads under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and sun. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. Small, weathered, with chipped white paint and a front porch that creaked like a memory. Inside, the furniture was covered in white sheets. I peeled them back slowly like I was uncovering a crime scene. I sat on the same couch where Claire and I had watched old movies. I walked down to the dock where we'd fished and talked about her dreams. I stood in the kitchen, my fingers resting on the counter where she once cut strawberries, while I read aloud from a book of poetry. And then I did something that surprised even me. I opened the laptop and began typing a list. Things I gave you without you knowing. A childhood without yelling. A home where the lights always worked. My career promotion when you needed me home more. My health when I skipped appointments to pay for yours. Every second of every day wondering if I was enough. The list went on for pages. I wasn't writing it to shame her. I was writing it to remember myself. To anchor who I had been, because that version of me had been drowning under the weight of her contempt. I needed to rebuild my voice, because soon I would need it. While there, I did something else, something bold. I called a lawyer, not one from the neighborhood, not one with ties to my ex. A professional I found quietly, a woman who specialized in estate protection. We spoke for 2 hours. She asked questions I'd never thought to ask myself. Do you have a will? Is your property an irrevocable trust or not? Do you want to disinherit someone? That last question hit me hard. Disinherit. My daughter. I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew the mere fact that I had to consider it meant everything had changed. After the call, I stood out on the dock watching the water ripple gently under a silver sky. I thought about what it means to be a mother, and whether that role comes with an expiration date in your child's eyes. Did Claire ever truly love me, or had I just been useful, until she was ready to take the wheel and push me out of the car? I stayed at the lake house for one more night. That morning, before leaving, I took the diary and copied 3 pages into a private file on my laptop. Not to punish her, not to expose her, but because I needed to protect myself. If she was going to build a case, emotional or legal, I needed to have one of my own. On the drive back, I felt calm, not healed, but focused, because I now knew exactly what was coming. Claire wasn't just going to take my house, she was going to rewrite my story, and she thought I'd let her do it. But I hadn't taught English for 30 years without learning one thing. The pen always has 2 sides, and now it was my turn to write. The return from the lake house was like stepping out of fog and into the fire. I pulled into my driveway late in the afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the front steps. I hadn't told anyone I was gone, and yet there she was. Claire, sitting on my porch swing. She stood the moment she saw my car, smoothing down her blouse as if to compose herself. But her eyes betrayed her. There was no warmth, no relief, only calculation. I parked slowly, grabbed my bag, and approached. I said nothing. Let her speak first. Hi, Mom. Her voice was light, casual, practiced. Where were you? I stopped by earlier and the house was locked. I didn't answer her question. I just unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and let her follow. She didn't ask for permission. Of course she didn't. She'd stopped seeing this place as mine a long time ago. She sat on the same kitchen stool she always had growing up, legs crossed, arms folded like a news anchor prepping a segment. I've been thinking, she began, her tone clipped but falsely gentle, about the house. And about, well, your future. I didn't look up. I started boiling water for tea. She kept going. I mean, you're retired now. And this place is, let's be honest, a lot to maintain. It's just too much house for one person. I stirred the water slowly, watching the steam rise. And I think, she continued, that maybe it's time we formalize things. Maybe I take over the property now, so we can transition more smoothly. I could move in with Kevin. You could downsize. Something cozier. Near Lillian. My throat burned. She wasn't asking. She was presenting a plan. One that had no room for my opinion. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a takeover. I turned slowly and looked her in the eye. Claire, have you been in my office? She blinked. What? My office? I repeated. Did you go in there? Touch anything? She hesitated only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. No, she said too quickly. Why would I do that? I nodded. Then calmly I said, then I assume you haven't seen my new will. The blood drained from her face. She laughed, or tried to, a dry, brittle sound. You changed your will? I sipped my tea. Yes, I said softly. I have, and I made some other calls too. Her mask slipped. For a second I saw the anger flare behind her eyes. Then she buried it again. Why would you do that without talking to me? You're the one who stopped talking, Claire. I just finally listened. Silence stretched between us. She stood up, pacing the room like a lawyer preparing her closing arguments. This is insane. I've always been here for you. I've helped you. I even came back from New York to be closer. Did you? I asked quietly. Or did you come back because the lease on your apartment expired and Kevin's job stalled? She flinched. The truth was beginning to hit her like hail, sharp, fast, unrelenting. I took a deep breath. Claire, I read your diary. Her eyes snapped to mine. You what? I didn't mean to at first. It was left in my drawer. But then, I kept reading, and what I saw broke my heart. She was trembling now with anger or fear or both. You had no right. And you had no right to plot against me under my roof, to speak about me the way you did, to treat my life like a chessboard. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I walked toward her, slowly, controlled. I raised you with love, with sacrifices you'll never fully understand, and you spat on that love because you thought you deserved more. Tears were forming in her eyes, but I didn't soften. You think I owe you this house, my future, my silence. I owe you nothing but the truth. And here it is. If you keep walking down this path, you will lose me. She broke then, just for a second. Her voice cracked. I was scared, Mom. I thought if I didn't claim some kind of future, I'd get left behind. You always seemed so strong, like you didn't need anyone, not even me. I stared at her, this girl who was once my little shadow, who used to cry when I left for work, who once made me macaroni necklaces and sang to me while brushing my hair. When had we lost each other, I reached into my bag and pulled out the diary. I'm not keeping this, I said, but I copied the pages that matter, because I need to protect myself now the same way you tried to protect your interests. I handed it to her. She didn't take it. Claire, I don't want war. But if you keep treating me like a burden you need to manage, then you'll leave me no choice. She turned, staring at the window. Her lips pressed tight. I didn't mean to become the villain. I nodded. Then stop acting like one. After she left, I locked the door and sat down in the quiet. I should have felt powerful. But all I felt was tired. I wasn't at the end of this story, not even close. But I had finally stopped pretending it was a happy one. That night, sleep didn't come. Even with the windows shut and the lights off, the house seemed too loud. Every creak of the floor, every rattle of the pipes reminded me that something had cracked wide open between Claire and me. The next morning, I found myself walking through each room like I was saying goodbye. Not to the house, but to the version of motherhood I had held on to, the one where love would be enough to keep a daughter close, to make her kind, to keep her honest. I ended up in the study. The same room Claire had tried to enter before, the room she believed held the new will, the documents, the so-called power. And she was right. Everything was there, but something else was too. A letter. One I had written after reading her diary. One I wasn't sure I would ever give her. But now, as the silence deepened between us, I knew she needed to read it. Even if she never responded. It said, "Claire, if you're reading this, then you know I've read the diary. I wasn't snooping. You left it in my drawer. Maybe that was an accident. Or maybe it was your way of telling me what you couldn't say out loud. Either way, I read it and I can't unread it. You wrote things no mother should ever have to see. You called me a liability, a loose end. You planned with Kevin how to ease me out of my own home. You laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate me with fake concern. But the part that truly shattered me wasn't your scheming. It was your belief that I owed you my life just because I gave you yours. Let me be clear, I gave you everything I could. Every night I stayed up sewing costumes when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. Every meal I skipped so you could have seconds. Every smile I forced when all I wanted to do was cry from exhaustion. That was love, not debt. You don't owe me either. I never raised you with that expectation, but you do owe me the truth. And I deserve the right to protect myself from someone who no longer sees me as family, only as a stepping stone to her own future. You are my daughter, and I will always love you. But love does not mean surrender. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it inside a padded envelope, along with a copy of the updated will. Then I mailed it to Claire. Not by text. Not by email. No casual delivery. A letter. A weight in her hand. Something she'd have to sit with. By the next afternoon, she called. I let it ring. She called again. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat by the window and stared out at the garden. The same garden we used to tend together. She'd dig, I'd plant. It was where she once buried a time capsule with glitter pens and a note that said, "I want to be a good person when I grow up." I wondered if she remembered that, or if the version of herself who wrote that note had long been replaced by someone else. The next day, she showed up at the house. This time, she knocked. I opened the door but didn't move aside. She looked small, smaller than I remembered. Her arms were crossed tightly, the envelope in one hand. "You didn't have to send this," she said, her voice stiff. "I did," I said, "because I needed you to see what you've become." She flinched. "I was just trying to protect our future." "By stealing mine?" She shook her head, frustrated. "You don't understand what it's like, Mom. Watching you fade into retirement, knowing I have to build something out of nothing, while you just sit in this big house refusing to move forward." My voice rose before I could stop it. "Refusing to move forward, Claire. I sacrificed my life so you could build yours. And now you want to push me out of the picture like I'm some outdated piece of furniture." She went quiet. Tears formed real this time, not manipulative, just young. "Kevin's been pressuring me about money, about the future, about making decisions. I didn't know how to say no." "So you decided to say yes to betraying me?" She sat down on the steps. I was scared. I still am. I didn't know how to ask for help without looking weak. And I didn't know how to protect myself without losing you, I said, quieter. We sat in silence for a while, two women who shared blood but now stood on opposite sides of a chasm made of choices. Then I said what neither of us wanted to hear. I'm not changing the will back. Not yet. She nodded. I figured. But, I added, you're still my daughter. That hasn't changed. She looked up, eyes red. I'm not sure I deserve to be. You don't earn family, I said. But you can lose it if you keep treating it like property. She stood and walked to her car, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. Thank you for writing the letter, she said softly, even if it hurt. And with that, she drove away. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied, but I felt honest. And that after months of confusion was something. The days that followed were quiet, not peaceful, but hollow. I kept the curtains drawn not to shut out the light, but to hold in what little warmth remained. I cleaned, I organized, I cooked all the motions of a life still in progress, even if something inside me had paused. Claire didn't call, she didn't text, but every morning I checked my mailbox like she might have mailed back a letter of her own. Silly, maybe. But I still believed in old-fashioned remorse, the kind that took its time, that needed space to form into words. Instead, what I got was a knock on the door. It was Kevin. Alone. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. He stood on my porch like a salesman who'd lost the pitch, but still wanted the commission. I'm here to apologize, he said. Claire told me everything. About the letter, the diary, the will. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Did she tell you who left the diary in my drawer? He hesitated. No, but I assume it wasn't an accident. I nodded. Good assumption. His face tightened. She was scared, Maggie. We both were. This economy, the pressure. No, I interrupted. Don't do that. Don't make this about the world. This was about you and her. In this house. Plotting. His charm faltered just slightly. The mask cracked. I know we got carried away, he said. But I still think there's a future here for all of us. A way to reset. I tilted my head. A reset. He stepped closer. I know you're angry, hurt. But if you reinstate Claire, if you bring her back into the inheritance, we can rebuild trust. Families go through this kind of thing all the time. My chest burned. This wasn't about trust. This was about access. To my home, to my name, to what I had spent decades building. I let the silence stretch long enough to be uncomfortable. Then I said, Kevin, do you know how many nights I slept on a couch just so Claire could have a bed to herself? He blinked. No. Do you know how many birthdays I spent working double shifts so I could afford her college books without her knowing we were drowning in debt? He didn't respond. Do you know, I added, my voice sharper now, how many times I turned down my own life so she could have a shot at hers? His lips parted, but no words came out. I didn't do that for gratitude. I did it because that's what love is. Real love. Not whatever transaction you two wrote down in that diary like it was a legal strategy. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe guilt? Maybe calculation. That house that life is not yours to scheme your way into, I finished. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I closed the door in his face, and this time, I locked it. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not from betrayal that had passed, but from grief. I grieved the daughter I raised. The sweet, imaginative girl who used to read aloud in funny voices, who once wrote a poem in second grade that ended with "My mom is the sun that warms all my flowers." Where had she gone? And had I somehow helped her disappear? I went back to the diary. Not to punish myself, but to look for clues. Somewhere in all those pages, I hoped to find a turning point, a line, a sentence, a date, where she began to change. And I found it. March 12th, 2 years ago. A short entry. Kevin says I'm too soft, that if I don't start thinking ahead, I'll end up like Mom, stuck in a house waiting for someone to remember her. Maybe he's right. Maybe love isn't enough anymore. It was like finding the moment she chose his voice over mine. From then on, her writing got colder, more tactical, like she was slowly replacing emotion with a checklist of how to secure her future. I closed the book and placed it back in my drawer. This time, I locked it, because now I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could protect the present and the version of myself that still wanted to believe in forgiveness, just not at the cost of being fooled again. The next day, I called a lawyer, not to change the will again, but to update the living trust, the healthcare proxy, and to place the house into a revocable trust that gave me full control, even in medical emergencies. If Claire or Kevin wanted a future with me in it, they'd have to rebuild it from scratch. No shortcuts, no secret diaries, no porch-side apologies. They would have to show up not just at my door, but in their own hearts. And even then, it might not be enough. But for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. And that steadiness wasn't revenge. It was survival. I started to live again not out of spite, but because I had to. The truth was, I couldn't let their betrayal be the closing chapter of my life. Not after everything I had endured, and certainly not after how hard I had worked to keep things afloat all these years. If anything, their deception gave me clarity, a sharp-edged lens that cut through the fog I had wandered in for far too long. I joined a local book club at the library. It felt strange walking into a room full of strangers, but as the weeks passed, I realized these women, many around my age, carried their own invisible wounds. Some talked about lost husbands, others about estranged children. One woman quietly mentioned that her son had taken her entire retirement fund and moved across the country without looking back. We never called it a support group, but that's what it became. One Thursday after book club, I stayed back to help clean up. As I arranged the chairs and tucked away a stack of untouched cookies, Annette, the club organizer, touched my elbow. "You're quieter than usual today," she said gently. "Something on your mind?" I opened my mouth almost instinctively to say, "No, I'm fine." But instead, I said I read something I wasn't supposed to, and now I can't unknow it. She nodded as if she understood more than I had spoken aloud. "It's strange," she replied, "how knowing the truth can feel like both a wound and a gift." That stayed with me. It echoed in my mind later that night as I watered my garden. Each droplet hitting the soil reminded me that healing is slow. Pain lingers, but life, like a seed buried beneath dirt, continues in quiet, invisible ways. One morning, nearly a month since Kevin had appeared at my door, I received an unexpected letter. Handwritten. From Claire. I stared at the envelope like it might explode. I turned it over twice before tearing it open. Inside was a single page. "Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive me. Not yet. I'm not even sure I deserve that. But I do want to say I'm sorry. Not just for the diary or the will or the horrible things I wrote. I'm sorry for who I let myself become. For letting fear and pressure twist me into someone who saw you as an obstacle instead of a home. Kevin and we've separated. Temporarily for now. That may not mean anything to you, and I won't pretend it fixes anything. But I want to start over, not for the inheritance, not for the house, for us. If you ever feel ready, I'd like to talk. No expectations. Just coffee. With love, Claire." I read it 3 times. My fingers trembled by the second read, because while I didn't trust her yet, something in her voice and her handwriting even felt real. Small. Human. Not manipulative. Not calculated. But maybe raw. That Sunday, I went to the local cafe we used to visit when she was a teenager. It was an old brick shop with uneven floorboards and chipped mugs, but they still made the cinnamon buns she loved. I wasn't sure if she'd show, but she did. She walked in with no makeup, wearing an oversized sweater and jeans that didn't match. She looked like someone halfway through a breakdown or maybe halfway through a rebuild. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. We sat. For 5 minutes, we didn't speak. We just sipped our coffee and listened to the jazz music playing in the background. Then quietly, she said, "I was scared I'd become you." I froze, but she went on before I could respond. "I don't mean that how it sounds. I just, you gave so much to everyone. You made sacrifices that were invisible. And I thought if I didn't protect myself, I'd end up invisible too." I swallowed. And now I asked. "Now I think you were the only one who ever showed up for me," she said. The lump in my throat rose fast, sharp, and sudden. I looked away toward the window. "I was always proud of you," I said. "Even when you failed. Even when you were cruel. Because I saw you, all of you. And I wanted you to learn the world wasn't your enemy." She blinked fast. "I think I made the world my excuse," she whispered. We sat in silence again. Not every wound needs an instant closure. Some just need to be acknowledged. So I reached out slowly and placed my hand over hers. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to a ghost. We didn't fix everything that day. She didn't move back home. I didn't restore her in the will. But we started something. We agreed to meet again in a week. We'd pick a new book to read together. A mother-daughter club of 2. And for now, that was enough. Because rebuilding trust isn't a decision. It's a series of small, stubborn acts. A week passed. Then 2. Claire and I kept meeting. Each time the air between us grew a little less jagged. We laughed tentatively, then genuinely. We argued too, especially when memories surfaced with sharp edges. But the difference now was that we stayed at the table. We didn't walk away. I still hadn't spoken to Kevin. And honestly, I didn't plan to. Claire never pushed me to, perhaps because she knew there were fractures too deep to be glued. Or perhaps because somewhere inside her she was finally beginning to see him the way I had tried to all those years. But healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean undoing what had been done. One morning, while reorganizing some old boxes in the garage, I came across something I hadn't seen in years, a photo album Claire had made for me on my 50th birthday. On the last page, she'd written in bold purple marker, "To the woman who gave me life, even when she had none left to give." I sat down on the cold floor and cried, not because I was sad, but because that Claire had once existed, and maybe maybe she was still buried under all the damage. Later that week, I invited her over to the house. Not for coffee, not even for dinner. For something simpler, gardening. It was one of the few things that always grounded me, and I needed to see her with her hands in the dirt planting something that might survive. We stood side by side under the sun fingers, dirty pulling weeds and laughing at worms like we used to when she was little. "I miss this," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "So did I admitted. We worked in silence after that. And as I watched her kneel beside the rose bush I had planted the year she left for college, I realized something unexpected: she wanted to belong again. But I had learned the hard way that love must be guarded with wisdom, not with locks, not with coldness, but with a mind that remembers. So when we sat down on the porch with lemon water and sweat on our brows, I said the thing I'd rehearsed for weeks. "Claire, I've updated the will. You're not in it." Her face didn't flinch, and that in itself was progress. "I know," she said quietly, "but I left something else," I continued, "a letter. For you. For after I'm gone. And I hope it will matter more than any piece of land or asset." She looked at me then, her eyes searching. "I don't want your house, Mom," she said. "I just want you." My throat tightened. I believed her. For the first time, I truly did. But peace is not a straight road. The next week, I received a letter from a lawyer. Kevin was suing me. He was challenging the updated will on the basis of mental decline. Apparently, he believed I was no longer of sound mind, that I had been manipulated by my own emotional instability. I laughed. Then I cried. Then I laughed again. Claire came over immediately when I told her. She stormed into the house with a red face and shaking hands. I had no idea he was doing this, she said. He never mentioned it. God, he just doesn't quit. No, I said. He doesn't. But I didn't panic, because by now I had something I hadn't had when this all began. Support. Claire stood beside me as I spoke with my lawyer. She offered to write a statement to testify to my mental fitness to describe the manipulation Kevin had subjected us both to over the years, but I asked her not to. I don't want you involved in another war, I said. I want to fight with you this time, she said. I owe you that. But I shook my head. I don't want to win through revenge, I said. I want to win with clarity. The case was petty and weak. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, called it a tantrum in legal form. We gathered my medical records, therapy notes, even character letters from people in my book club. I didn't want to put Claire in the center again, but she left a letter with my attorney anyway, not for the court, but for me. It ended with, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn your respect. If that means protecting you now, I'll do it even from my past self. I read it twice, then I tucked it in the drawer next to my bed. The court dismissed the challenge in 3 weeks. Kevin never even showed up in person. His lawyer looked embarrassed. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, Claire met me on the steps with a single yellow tulip. You always liked those, she said awkwardly. I took the flower. And then I hugged her tightly. No words. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just exhales. Back home, I sat on the porch in my rocking chair, watching the late afternoon light pour across the wooden floorboards. The wind carried the scent of soil and rosemary from the garden, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt right. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had reclaimed the most precious thing I'd lost in the middle of betrayal, myself. A month later, I received a package in the mail, no return address. I almost didn't open it. Something about it felt unclean, but curiosity, as always, won. Inside was a hardcover diary, not Claire's, but mine. One I hadn't seen in over 30 years. It was the journal I kept during the first years after Claire was born, raw, frantic, filled with scrawled confessions of a young woman juggling a child, a job, a cheating husband, and dreams that never got to bloom. I didn't remember ever losing it. I thought maybe I'd thrown it out in one of those fits of let go to survive. But someone had found it and sent it back to me. Tucked inside the cover was a small sticky note in Kevin's handwriting. Thought you might want to remember who you really were. I stared at it. Not because I was touched, but because of the sheer nerve. He wanted to remind me of my worst years, my most vulnerable self, as if that would shame me back into silence, into compliance, into gratitude for scraps. But something else happened. I opened the book, and I read. It was like meeting a ghost, not of someone dead, but someone unfinished. Each page was drenched in fear, worry that I wasn't a good enough mother, that I was too strict, too lenient, too exhausted, too invisible. I read about nights Claire wouldn't sleep and days I couldn't stop crying in the car before going to work. But in between the chaos were moments of radical love, descriptions of her tiny fingers curled around mine, of bedtime stories whispered while Kevin worked late, of birthdays with handmade cakes and cheap decorations that still made her smile. I had forgotten those parts. Kevin probably hoped I'd read that diary and feel ashamed. Instead, I felt validated, because the woman in those pages wasn't weak. She was surviving. And sometimes surviving is the most defiant thing a woman can do. I called Claire. Did you know your brother sent me something? She paused. He mentioned it. Of course. I didn't think he actually would. He did. And I let the silence hold. And he failed again, I finally said. But thank him for me, would you? Claire laughed. Seriously, yes. I said. He reminded me of something important. I never gave up, not on you, not on myself. She was quiet for a moment. Then I'm glad, Mom. I really am. Weeks passed quietly. Claire came over more often. She brought coffee, sometimes flowers, sometimes just herself. We didn't talk about Kevin much anymore. But one day she looked at me and said, "Do you think there's anything he could do to make it right?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was no. There are some betrayals so layered, so patient in how they rot the foundation, that undoing them isn't about an apology. It's about recognizing that some bridges weren't burned, they were never real to begin with. I don't hate him, I said, but I don't owe him my peace. Claire nodded. I think that's fair. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a thin envelope. I've been working on this for a while. It's a letter. For you. I opened it later that night. It wasn't long, just 3 paragraphs, but each word was dense, trembling with honesty. She told me how she had let the wrong people influence her, how Kevin had twisted fact slowly, drop by drop, until she questioned everything I said. She wrote about her guilt not just for what she believed, but for how quickly she let her belief become cruelty. And then the line that broke me: I think I hated you because I needed someone to blame for my own weakness. I read that sentence again and again, and somehow I understood. Not because I agreed, but because I knew what it meant to project pain onto the person closest to you, especially a mother, especially the one who stood when everyone else collapsed. The next morning, I wrote her back. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't long. It just said, "We both let people shape us in ways we regret. But I see you now, and I still love you. Let's not waste what's left." I sealed the letter and left it in her car. Later that night, she texted a single heart emoji, and for the first time in months, I slept a full 8 hours. But healing has shadows. The next day, while walking past the old bookshelf in the hallway, I saw something wedged behind it. Another notebook. My second journal, the one I'd kept in secret after Kevin moved out. I flipped through it, and I came to a page I had entirely forgotten about. A list, titled, "When I Stop Being Afraid." Tell Claire the truth about Kevin. Write my book. Plant a dogwood tree. Travel to Montana. Speak at a library again. I smiled, because I had done 3 of the 5, and now it was time to finish the rest. The first thing I did the next morning was dig up the side yard. It wasn't a grand symbolic act, just me in an old hoodie and gloves, shovel in hand, sweating in the July sun. I had gone out early and bought a young dogwood tree. Small, fragile, but alive. Claire stood in the doorway sipping coffee. "You're really doing it," she said. "Some things are long overdue." I didn't say more. She didn't ask more. We both knew this wasn't just about gardening. It was about reclaiming space inside and out. Later that week, I emailed the local library. It was the same one where I used to volunteer long before things went bad, before Kevin's manipulations, before Claire's distance, before I became a ghost in my own family. I asked if they still did author readings or community events. The reply came quickly. "We'd love to have you speak. It's been too long." I sat at my desk, fingers trembling, staring at the screen. Then I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "The things we choose not to see." And I began to write. Writing it wasn't easy. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't a memoir either. It was something in between, a soft confession dressed in observation. I wrote about motherhood, about sacrifice, about how women make themselves small to hold up the world around them. I wrote about the quiet bruises that aren't physical, the kind that happen when you're dismissed, doubted, or rewritten by your own children. And I wrote about the diary, both hers and mine. How truth once released doesn't break you. It frees you, even if it cuts on the way out. 2 weeks later, I stood at a small podium inside the library's event room. About 40 people were there. Familiar faces, a few strangers, and to my surprise, Claire. She sat in the second row, her expression open, unguarded. I read the essay aloud. My voice didn't shake. I didn't cry. But when I reached the section about what it means to feel unseen by the people you gave your life to, I paused. Not for effect, but because Claire was crying. And in her tears, I saw not just guilt, but release. We were both healing in real time. Afterward, she hugged me in front of everyone, not one of those stiff, polite hugs, but the kind where someone clings to you like you're a piece of home they thought was gone forever. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. I smiled. I'm starting to feel proud of me, too. But healing isn't always linear, because the next day Kevin showed up, on my front porch, with flowers and a forced smile. I didn't open the door right away. He knocked again, louder this time. When I finally opened it, I didn't invite him in. "I came to apologize," he said. "Do it from there." He blinked, surprised, but then nodded. "I shouldn't have sent you the diary. That was cruel." I said nothing. I was angry. About Dad. About Claire listening to you instead of lies. I cut in. He sighed. "Maybe. I always felt like you judged me for staying close to him." "I didn't judge you. I feared for you." That shut him up. He looked away, eyes flicking toward the garden. "Nice tree," he said. I folded my arms. "Do you want something, Kevin?" He shook his head. "No, I miss having a mom." I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered. He didn't miss me. He missed the version of me that bent, forgave, forgot. "I'm still your mother," I said. "But I'm no longer your shield." He nodded, put the flowers down on the porch step, and left. That night, I stood by the dogwood tree, watering it gently. Claire came over, saw the flowers. "Did you see him?" "Yes." "Did it help?" "No." She sighed. "I think he's unraveling, Mom." "Maybe." I looked up at the sky. Stars poked through the clouds. But some people need to fall apart to realize they're not whole. Inside, I lit a candle, sat at my desk, and continued writing. But now it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about rebirth. About what it means to rebuild after a storm that lasted decades. And how sometimes the truest parts of us aren't the loudest, they're the ones we return to quietly over time once the noise dies down. It was almost ironic. The diary that broke me was now the very thing I kept closest to me. Not for obsession, not for pain, but as a compass, a reminder of where not to return. Claire and I began having what she called real talks in the evenings. No screens, no distractions. Just two women, mother and daughter, confronting the years lost between them. It wasn't always smooth. Sometimes she'd say something and I'd flinch. Sometimes I'd bring up a memory and she'd go silent. But we kept showing up, and that was the point. One night she asked me something I didn't expect. "Would you want to live with me?" I stared at her. She smiled nervously. "I mean, not right away, but maybe, someday. When things settle." I sipped my tea, thinking. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I think I want to live with myself first." She blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, that makes sense." I touched her hand. "But I'd like to visit often." She smiled wider. "Good, because I'm planning Sunday dinners." There was something sacred in reclaiming the ordinary. Cooking with her again, shopping at the farmer's market, sitting in silence on the porch, both of us reading our own books, just breathing the same air. One afternoon, I looked over and saw her reading a dog-eared novel I'd lent her 20 years ago. The color purple. She caught me staring and grinned. "It hits different now." I didn't say anything, but I felt something loosen inside my chest, a long-standing knot that finally unraveled. Then came the call. Kevin again. Only this time he wasn't calling me, he was calling Claire. She picked up on speakerphone. Claire. He said, his voice hoarse. Dad had a stroke. I froze. Claire looked at me torn. I nodded. Go. I want you to come, she said. I shook my head. I've been to that battlefield enough times. Claire left the next morning. When she returned 2 days later, she looked tired. Not sad tired. He's alive, she said. But different, slower, humbled. I said nothing. He asked about you. That made me laugh. Cold and hollow. I bet he did. She sat beside me. You know, when I was there, I realized something. I waited. He never really asked who I was. Just who I was to him. That distinction was everything. The next day I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Kevin. 3 pages front and back. It wasn't groveling. It wasn't warm. It was searching. He wrote about being raised by a man who taught him silence was safer than emotion, that control was more reliable than connection. He admitted to envying my bond with Claire and resenting that I never seemed to need him the way I needed her. And then he said this: I weaponized your pain because I didn't know how to sit in my own. I read that line 3 times, and for the first time in years I cried for him, not for what he did to me, but for the boy in him that never learned better. I didn't write back, but I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box. The same box that now held Claire's diary. Not as evidence, not as ammunition, but as witnesses to everything we had survived. Weeks passed, and something surprising happened. People began reaching out, strangers who'd heard my reading at the library, friends who'd read my essay after Claire posted it on her blog. They shared their stories. Mothers who felt erased, daughters who came back too late, sons who only saw the damage once they had children of their own. Each message felt like a thread weaving something new between grief and grace. And then came an email from a small publisher. They'd seen my essay. They asked if I'd consider expanding it into a collection: stories, reflections, and pieces on generational silence and emotional inheritance. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I replied with one word: yes. That night I lit a single candle, sat by the dogwood tree, and read aloud the first lines of my new manuscript. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of revelation. And the cost of not knowing the truth until it's almost too late. The wind moved through the leaves like whispers. I closed the notebook and looked up at the stars. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The hardest part of healing isn't the pain, it's the quiet that follows. No more accusations, no more dramatic discoveries. Just silence. A stillness that forces you to decide, will you live as the person you were before the damage, or grow into someone else? That was the question I asked myself every morning, and most days I didn't have an answer. Claire and I found a rhythm, one built on choice, not obligation. She invited me to stay for the weekend, and I did. She asked me to help her paint her office, and I did. But she also asked questions I wasn't always ready to answer. Like the night she looked up from her cup of tea and said, "Do you think I'm like him?" I didn't lie. You're his daughter. But you're my daughter too. And what you choose is yours. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. Sometimes she reminded me of myself at her age, full of unasked questions and a fear of the answers. One afternoon, Claire came over with a small, neatly wrapped box. "I want you to open this when I leave," she said, "and don't lie. I'll know if you peek." I smiled. "Okay, I promise." After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside was a hardcover journal. On the front, in gold-pressed lettering, it read, "To my mother, what I never said." There was a note tucked inside. "You once read my diary. Now I want you to read this one willingly." I stared at the first page for several minutes before I turned it. And when I did, I found something I never expected: letters. Each one addressed to me. but they weren't apologies. They were confessions. Claire wrote about her loneliness after the divorce, about feeling like she had to be the peacekeeper between me and Kevin, about the resentment she swallowed when I leaned on her too much, and the guilt she carried when she pulled away. She wrote about her love for me, but also her fear that I'd never see her as an adult. I read every page. Some sentences made me wince, others broke me, but all of them, everyone stitched a new thread between us. Because this time, she wasn't hiding. This time, she wanted to be seen. When I saw her next, I didn't say anything at first. I just hugged her. Longer than usual. She didn't pull away. She whispered, "You read it?" I nodded. "And I saw you," I said. "Really saw you." She closed her eyes for a moment as if letting go of something she'd carried for too long. Months passed, and the book deal went through. The small publisher offered modest money but full creative control. I accepted without hesitation. Claire helped me edit the drafts. Sometimes we laughed at my awkward phrasing. Sometimes we argued over the tone of a story. Was I being too forgiving, too bitter? But always we came back to the truth. Not the polished truth. The raw, ugly human truth. The day the proofs arrived, I held the book in my hands like it was a newborn. On the cover, "What We Leave Unsaid," a mother's reckoning. Inside the dedication I wrote for Claire, because sometimes we lose each other to find ourselves. She cried when she saw it. So did I. We did a small launch at the local library. Just a dozen chairs, a microphone, and a folding table with some copies. I expected a handful of old friends. But when I arrived, the room was packed. People I hadn't seen in years. Strangers who'd heard whispers of the story. Even a few former students, now adults, holding their own parents' hands. I read a passage aloud, the one where I found the diary, and when I finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause. But more than that came the faces. Faces of people who had also been lied to, betrayed, misunderstood, or silenced. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping because they saw themselves. That night, Claire and I sat on the porch. She handed me a glass of wine. "To truth," she said. I tapped her glass. "To earn truth," I replied. And we drank. Not to forget the past, but to honor the fact that we had survived it. The air smelled like autumn, crisp, earthy, and clean. Leaves danced across the yard, gold and red, as if nature herself were shedding the past. I sat in the kitchen watching Claire make French toast the way I used to, thick bread, a pinch of cinnamon, and too much butter. She'd started coming over more often, not because she had to, because she wanted to. It had been 6 months since the book was published. Reviews were modest, sales nothing extraordinary, but the letters I received, those were extraordinary. Strangers poured their hearts into envelopes. One woman wrote, "Your words made me open my mother's closet and find the shoebox of letters I never read." Another, "My son read your story and finally asked me why I left his father." We talked. Really talked. A teenage girl wrote in careful cursive, "Your pain felt like mine." It made me brave. People often ask me if I ever forgave Claire, but they ask it wrong. It's not about forgiving her. It's about understanding that she wasn't whole when she betrayed me, and neither was I. We were both fragments, shards of two women trying to carry love, grief, and anger in the same small container. It overflowed. It had to. One rainy evening, I pulled out the original diary again, the one I wasn't supposed to read. I flipped to the page that had shattered me all those months ago. "Sometimes I wish Mom would disappear for a while. I need a break from her sadness." Back then, those words crushed me. Now they still hurt. But I read them differently. She didn't say she didn't love me. She didn't say she wished I was dead. She said she needed space. And I never gave her permission to need that. Maybe that was my failure. The house feels lighter now. Not just because Claire's laughter fills it again, Not just because the tension between us has thinned like the early morning fog, but because I've stopped waiting for life to go back to anything. There is no before and after when you've seen the truth. There's only what you build next. Last week, Claire showed me something unexpected. Another journal. But this one wasn't secret. It was for me. Inside were blank pages and one note. Let's write the next chapters together. I held it in my lap, stunned, and then slowly I picked up a pen. You may be wondering why I told this story. Why I opened up something so private, so painful. It's because someone out there is still holding their breath, afraid to speak, afraid to open that drawer, that notebook, that memory. Let me say this clearly. Secrets don't protect you. They bury you. And sometimes the only way back to love is through the fire of truth. So before you go, if you've ever held onto a truth too long, tell us below. If you've ever read something that changed your world, let us know. And if this story moved, you don't leave without hitting that subscribe button. I promise you, there are more truths worth hearing.